some people know what yoga is because they went and took a class, or they watched one of your videos, or they watched something that is this physical practice. And I would just love it if we could just talk about what is that practice that most people know, and what isn't it? Because you said something like no one was doing Warrior 2 150 years ago. And if you go into India, everyone's a yogi. And I would just love to get your thoughts raw on what it is and what it isn't.
Okay, so this is a, let's put it into a box real quick so that we can understand it, and then hopefully we're able to take it out of that box. Okay. I think that's a good way, very scientific way.
It's a good way of putting it.
Good way to put it in the box so we know what it is, and then we'll take it out.
Okay, cool. I like that.
Okay,
Let's do
but
that.
to just understand that we can understand the whole by the sum of its parts.
Right, we cannot.
We cannot.
Agreed.
There's no way.
Agreed.
So yoga is this very old thing. It was very religious. Its roots are in Hinduism. It goes back to, like, if you read the Bhagavad Gita or the Mahabharata, these very old Indian texts of what yoga is. And that's broken down into, bhakti yoga, which is the yoga of devotion. This is singing and love, and its basic bhakti is kind of like love or devotion. You have Gyan yoga, which is knowledge. Jnana means wisdom. And this is a very intellectual part of yoga, understanding the truth. And a lot of people that go into this path, or at least historically, is I am not my body. I'm something greater than my body. This is not who I am. And so you'll see these sadhus doing these defiances of holding their arms up over their head for 20 years, or doing those kinds of things.
And that actually happens, that stuff, right?
That stuff happens, that they're saying, I'm denying this false reality. I don't believe in it. Then you have the Raja Yoga, which is Patanjali's yoga. This is the 8-limbed path, and part of that is, Raja means like king or great. And then you have Hatha Yoga, or sometimes called Ashtanga Yoga, which is actually the 8 limbs, and this is like the physical part of yoga. All of them are yoga. They're all like the same path, and I think a good way to look at this is, if the goal is to essentially be liberated, that's the goal of yoga, freedom. And we come to a mountain, and at that peak of the mountain is freedom. And we look, and there's all these different ways up the mountain, and that's the misconception with yoga, with most things, that we think that the path that I'm on is the path because it's the one I understand, and we forget all the other paths around the mountain. Some journeys are harder than others. Some create growth in some areas that others don't. But at the end of every path, when you're working towards the summit, is the same. And so this is the tools of yoga. Once we understand that the summit is the same, it doesn't matter what it looks like, we're all going to the summit. Then you can understand what you're doing is just a tool. So before the turn of the century, when yoga was coming to the West, there's this guy named, this is a quick history lesson in what yoga is, a guy named Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda. He was very much a Raja yogi, the yoga of Patanjali, the Yoga Sutras, this kind of thing, which wasn't about movement. Movements, asana is only mentioned twice in the Yoga Sutras. And when they're talking about it, it's really talking about a seated meditation. So they say Shiva is the father of yoga because it shows him seated in a lotus or a cross-legged position. And this is the first yoga pose. But if we look back to what yoga poses are, if you look back at the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is an old yoga book, or the Shiva Samhita, or the Garunda Samhita, these very old texts that talk about movement, there's not a lot of poses and nothing that looks like a yoga class that you're going to go to at any of your local yoga studios, other than maybe Sukhasana or Padmasana, these seated positions, a couple other poses in there. So, the UK, or Britain, invaded into India around the turn of the century. And at that time, bodybuilding was a big thing. And so you had all these white Westerners coming in to India, where you have a lot of people that weren't into fitness. And there's this cultural change where the men of India felt very effeminate to that. And so they wanted to work into bodybuilding. And so what they took was something that was theirs, which was yoga, that had this type of fitness in it. And they adapted a lot of things into it. Some of it came from Swedish gymnastics. Some of it came from something called nature's cure, which came from the West, which was this idea of let's heal the ailments of the body through movement, through what the body does. I mean, it was not something that actually was inherent to yoga. It was using the body to heal everything else, to heal the mind.
Okay.
You know, it's moved into that. But the warrior poses and stuff came from gymnastics, calisthenics. A lot of this took place around Mysore in India, which is where Ashtanga yoga came from, which is a very physical type of yoga. But also at the time, there's the Swami Vivekananda who was saying like that this physical yoga is not yoga. It's funny because one of the things I get all the time, the handstands I do and all the hollow backs and the crazy stuff, is people go, that's not yoga, because they think yoga is supposed to look like something. This is us putting yoga into a box.
Right.
You know, if it doesn't look like my picture of yoga, then it's not yoga.
You reject that.
It's not that I reject it or not. That's that person's experience. You only understand the things by how you define it. Everything is like that. And some of the greatest things that we think that we all understand are like that. If we both talk about love, I understand what love is, you understand what love is. We have completely different definitions of it. It's not my job to tell you what you think about love is wrong. And that's what I've learned about yoga. It's not my job to tell somebody that what their opinion of yoga is wrong. When I started into it, I wouldn't have thought half the stuff that I think is yoga. So, no, it's not wrong. I think if you could see it from an outside perspective, it's not yoga. Because yoga, and even Patabi Joyce, you know, Ashtanga, he said, yoga is an internal practice, everything else is circus. And that saying has helped me a lot, but what's helped me more is getting back to, I have nothing to prove. Why am I trying to prove that I'm doing, whatever I'm doing is yoga?
But it is to you, and that's all that matters.
That's all that matters.
And so I had no idea that a lot of the moves that we might typically associate with yoga is fairly modern, like the last 100 years or so.
All yoga that you see is modern yoga.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I guess most people wouldn't know that. They would assume that all this stuff was kind of passed down through books and things. So,
but what's important about anything, like you grew up in San Diego, you remember Dogtown and all that, like skateboarding,
yeah,
how that came up before skateboards just had a tail and no nose. How are you supposed to kickflip on that thing?
Yeah.
Right. And so you had all these things, and if skateboarding stayed that way, it probably would have died because it would have got really stale. But you see as it progresses and moves and changes, like everything in time, you look at any kind of religion, yoga is a movement, but not in the movement as we move. It is a movement as in it's how society is changing. It's a cultural change. And unless it changes with the times, it's going to die. Religion has done it. And could you imagine if the Catholic Church was how it was in the medieval times?
Yeah.
You know, we were just going out and murdering people. Hey, going on crusades.
That's a good point.
It is, but it's still the Catholic Church. It's still the Holy Catholic Church. It still has the same roots that it's had for, you know, whatever, 2,000 years or so. Yoga is 5,000 years old. It's got roots, it's got history, but for it to stay relevant to the times, it has to change. It has to change with the people.
And so, to finish up, a lot of these practices are recent. It was combined with this English going into India,
yeah.
And now it's kind of what we now would see when we go to one of our studios. And
it was really the Westerners that came into India and through Mysore with these different practices, and as Iyengar and Patabi Joyce set it out into the West, that yoga has taken off. It's still, I think, yoga as we see modern yoga is much bigger in the West than it is in India. India will still view it as different, but it's actually modern yoga has come from the West back to India. But it's funny because we all go to India thinking that we're trying to find this yoga, and then we go there and we see people that are doing japa, you know, with their malas and going through and saying Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. You know, we see all these different practices and chanting mantras and having satsang. And we're like, well, this isn't yoga. Where's all the warrior twos? Why are these guys wearing these weird dhotis and stuff? So
you harp on the warrior two sometimes. Is a warrior two a symptom of someone trying to say that yoga's this?
Yeah, because warrior two really came from gymnastics, Swedish gymnastics.
Okay.
It was brought in through the Danes, and it was, but yet it is this like, everybody that sees a warrior two pose goes, that's yoga. Which is, it's just, again, it's, how do we define something? I want something that's really clear. I want to be able to point my finger at it and say, that's that, rather than taking the words away from it.
Right. Anything else we should put in the box before we get rid of the box about yoga?
About yoga? I think it's a beautiful thing. I mean, even in the box, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful practice. For us to understand this pathway, for us to move into this, the box is helpful. It is. And I don't think how anyone is doing their journey is wrong. And I don't try to push my ideas of what I think yoga is on anybody else. And if someone does on me, I don't take offense to it. If the tools work for that person, why change them?
Right.
If I see somebody hammering in a nail with a screwdriver and it's doing the job, I'm not going to be like, hey, you're doing that wrong. It's working.
Right.
Keep doing it.